possibilities for our great state not to try at this moment with everything we all have collectively. Thank you, Dan. And with the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, we now have a tax system that can help spur the renaissance of businesses and good-paying jobs that can come with the North Slope oil boom, that can come with the gas line. Alaskans know that buying equipment is one of the biggest costs when starting or expanding a business. This bill that we passed in July allows businesses to write off these costs in the first year. For our small business owners here, you know how important that is, including for equipment and research and development. This helps our small businesses keep more cash, invest more, and very importantly, create more jobs for Alaskans. For businesses and families, this bill prevented the largest tax increase in American history. It would have been $4 trillion, over $4 trillion, had we not acted last year, and replaced that with permanent tax relief. For Alaskan families, this means an estimated annual tax savings anywhere from $7,500 to over almost $11,000 for a family of four. And for Alaskans on Social Security, this bill creates a $12,000 deduction per couple, providing real relief for our seniors who are living on fixed income. We also eliminated taxes on tips and overtime, making it easier for Alaskans, working Alaskans, to keep more of what they've earned. And another, yeah, that's a good one. And another area where this bill delivers is child care. And I want to thank Elise Galvin, who has brought this issue to my attention, like so many other Alaskans, for years. This bill modernizes long outdated policies by strengthening the child tax credit, expanding dependent care assistance, and dramatically, historically, increasing tax credits for businesses to invest in their own child care facilities and pool resources with other businesses to do so. Thank you, Elise. We made big progress on this bill. So another comeback critical to our whole nation in our great state is the Alaska military comeback. Now, we know our history better than any other state. During some of our nation's most existential crises, like World War II and the Cold War, Alaska played an immensely important role in defending America. The father of the U.S. Air Force, General Billy Mitchell, called our state the most strategic place in the world. And for a time, our military posture reflected that truth. But when we won the Cold War, something dangerous began to happen. The Pentagon's understanding of Alaska's importance faded. Bases closed, armories shuttered across western Alaska. Alaska drifted from strategic cornerstone to strategic backwater in the eyes of many in the Pentagon. I saw this national security amnesia about our great state firsthand when I arrived in the Senate in 2015. The Obama administration had put out its Arctic strategy, and I was at a hearing with the brand new Secretary of Defense, and I held it up. And I said, Mr. Secretary, here's your Arctic strategy. It's 14 pages long, half of which are pictures. You talk about climate change the whole time, and you mention Russia as a threat once in a footnote. And I called it what it is. Slammed it on the dais. I said, this is a joke. This is a joke. The Pentagon has to do better. The Obama administration then announced a cut of additional 40,000 active duty Army troops in America, including the 5,000-strong J-Bear Base 425, the only airborne brigade combat team in the entire Asia Pacific. Just a few years later, the Coast Guard then announced it had plans to reduce its presence in Alaska. Now, Our military leaders over the years had forgotten how important Alaska was from a national security perspective for our country. But guess who didn't? You didn't. We didn't. Alaskans didn't. All of us, with our collective memory and knowledge, communities, veterans, legislators, families, we came together and made it clear that retreat was not an option. Cutting back on Alaska's military was something we would fight, and we fought. I also quickly learned as a new U.S. Senator the value of certain Senate prerogatives, especially putting holds on senior military and civilian confirmations until I got from them concrete commitments to build up forces in Alaska, not to draw them down. Slowly but surely, with everybody's help in our great state, and it was a collective effort, Alaska's military comeback began, and now it is in full force. Thank you, Will. We are now undergoing the largest military buildup and expansion, billions of dollars in investment since World War II. The 425 at J-Bear, it didn't get shuttered. It expanded into the U.S. Army's 11th Airborne Division, now fully centered in Alaska. Eielson didn't close. It's now home to 2 squadrons of F-35s, and when combined with the 2 squadrons of F-22s at J-Bear, it gives Alaska over 100 fifth-generation fighters. No place on the planet Earth has that kind of fifth-gen fighter combat power. More KC-135 tankers are en route to Alaska. I just had a stern conversation with the Secretary of the Air Force about this a couple days ago. Our role as the cornerstone of missile defense, protecting the whole country, is expanding significantly, particularly in the interior, with the $1 billion long-range discrimination radar finalized at Clear and the Golden Dome Initiative, which in the Working Families Tax Cut Act has about $25 billion for investment. The Ted Stevens Center for the Arctic, with over 60 dedicated veterans at J-Bear, has rapidly become one of the world's premier national security think tanks. And the infrastructure, thank you, Jamie. And the infrastructure we need in Alaska to project American power is expanding, with a $500 million investment in a brand new runway at J-Bear, $400 million to build the deep-water strategic port in Nome. And my favorite, also in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, $115 million to start reopening the Navy base at Adak, one of the most strategic places in the world. Now, even my beloved Marine Corps recently came to me, senior levels, saying, Senator, we have plans to expand in Alaska. And I'm like, hey, Marines, you're usually the first to fight. Like, get on with it, man. Let's go. But it is the Coast Guard comeback in Alaska that is truly historic. The Coast Guard didn't downsize that they were planning in Alaska. And I made sure of that by putting a hold on the confirmation of the Commandant of the Coast Guard's confirmation, until he provided me with a plan to expand the Coast Guard's presence in Alaska, which we are now doing in so many communities, with hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in Kodiak, Ketchikan, Seward, Sitka, Valdez, Petersburg. Everybody loves the Coast Guard. That's very true. Everybody loves the Coast Guard. I read that list, but I didn't get to probably certainly one of the most important on the expansion. And right here in Juneau, the expansion. Again, if you look at the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, on the back page, it talks about the largest investment in Coast Guard history, in American history from this bill. It's a $25 billion investment to fully rebuild our Coast Guard. As the chairman of the Coast Guard subcommittee, I was very honored to write a lot of this, but take a look at the numbers. 16 new icebreakers, 22 new cutters, 40 new helicopters, almost $4.5 billion in shoreside infrastructure, $300 million for Juneau, Alaska to home port the icebreaker Storis right here, which is going to happen. But we are not done. I recently chaired a Coast Guard subcommittee hearing with the comment on the Coast Guard, and when I asked them about the potential for more icebreakers being home ported in Alaska, imagine that, home porting an icebreaker in the state with the ice, he responded by saying the Coast Guard is considering up to home porting, quote, 4 more icebreakers in our great state. Even I was shocked by that. And this Coast Guard comeback is spurring some of the most exciting economic activity we've seen in years. It's not getting covered by the press, but it is really exciting. A boom in shipbuilding and heavy maintenance activity throughout our state, from Kodiak to Seward to Ketchikan, perhaps even in Wrangell. I was with Senator Stedman and Representative Byman just a couple days ago in Ketchikan, and you can't believe what's happening with this shipbuilding boom. These are great paying jobs that have expanded by the hundreds in our state, in the communities that I just mentioned, with room to grow as we get more ships from the Coast Guard and NOAA, and it is a really, really, really exciting element of our growing economy. The same commitment to keep security that protects Alaska on the world stage must also be made to protect Alaskans in their home and neighborhoods. Crime rates are going down, as the governor mentioned in his state, or the state to all of you, in many communities. But we can't be complacent. Protecting our children, confronting addiction and mental health challenges, and keeping all communities throughout our state safe requires standing firmly with law enforcement and giving them our full support. Nowhere have the stakes been higher in confronting the crime crisis in our state than in confronting the fentanyl crisis. Alaska has experienced the highest increase in fentanyl overdose rates in the nation for the past 3 years. We lost 400 young Alaskans just last year alone. And fentanyl is now responsible for more than 2/3 of all fatal overdoses in our state. These are our sons and daughters, brothers, sisters, nieces and nephews. They are our neighbors, and I guarantee you there's not one member of the legislature that doesn't know someone that's been impacted by this. These kids were our future, no longer. Much of this poison was smuggled across the southern border, some across the northern border, reaching even our most remote villages in our state. But we're cracking down. The open border policies of the Biden administration are fortunately a thing of the past. When the Trump administration returned to office, illegal border crossings have dropped by 99%. And for 8 consecutive months, 0 illegal immigrants have been released into the country. The Working Families Tax Cuts Act included $100 billion to secure the southern border and give our law enforcement the tools they needed to disrupt cartels, stop fentanyl before it reaches our towns and villages, and protect families and save lives. Now, that's the supply side of the challenge. There's also the demand side that we need to work on. This is something my team and I have been very focused on. If you take a look at one of these handouts, our One Pill Can Kill campaign. Some of you have helped me spread the word on this. This is where we've been working, my team and I, to get out to the schools, to get out to the high schools, the junior highs, and just talk to the kids about how dangerous this is. And we need to all continue to do that, because these young kids are our future, and losing 400 a year is simply unacceptable. We've also worked tirelessly to help our fishermen and coastal communities. As the chairman of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over fisheries, my team and I work on this issue relentlessly. I have a handout, another handout here, that goes through all the different areas in which we're focused on fisheries for our state. And this is something, again, we can work together on. My Save Our Seas Act legislation, the first one, the 2.01, we've had amendments to it, is still the most comprehensive ocean cleanup legislation ever passed by Congress, and we continue to be focused on that. We continue to confront the unfair global seafood trade practices that undercut Alaskan fishermen and our communities. My team and I worked very hard over years to secure the ban on Russian seafood trawlers, so there's no Russian seafood coming into America. And when we got that done, they started sending it to China, literally to launder the fish through China. So we shut that loophole down, and we will continue to push for stronger international coordination so the bad actors like Russia and China, who, by the way, use slave labor on their ships, who have the worst environmental standards in the world, who ravage the high seas and distort seafood markets and really hurt our coastal communities. This is something we are very, very focused on continuing. As I've been saying in many, many forums, we need to eat and encourage Americans to eat Alaskan freedom fish, not Russian and Chinese communist fish. But we still have a lot of work to do. I passed the Alaska Salmon Task Force Act to bring together the best minds in the state, federal, tribal, university, native, indigenous, all to come together, experts in our state, to understand and address the declines in Alaskan salmon runs. We've had this great variability of salmon runs, some very strong, like in Bristol Bay, others on the Yukon and Kuskokwim and in Southeast, historically low. Last year, I introduced the next phase of this comprehensive salmon-focused legislation called the Bycatch Reduction and Research Act to close remaining knowledge gaps through tools like adult salmon tagging, faster genetic analysis of bycatch, and new technologies and policies to reduce bycatch and protect marine habitats. I know you are all focused on these issues as well, and you have my commitment to continue to working closely with this body on these critical issues. I want to end my remarks with the focus on one of Alaska's greatest challenges, and that's affordable health care. Health care costs remain stubbornly high. Like so many one-size-fits-all programs designed in D.C., Obamacare failed our state. The law crashed Alaska's health insurance market, dropping us from 4 insurers before Obamacare was enacted to only 1, eventually leaving us now with just 2. And premiums for Alaskans in the individual market skyrocketed, the highest anywhere in America. Insurance companies got rich, and Alaskans paid the price. I am still working in a bipartisan group of senators on a reform package to extend premium tax credits after starting to vote to extend them in December of last year. We've also made progress, important progress, even historic progress, in bringing down the costs of prescription drugs for Alaskans, pairing long overdue PBM reform that we just passed last fall to rein in middlemen who have been driving up the costs of drugs with our work to ensure that Americans no longer pay more than developed nations for the same medicines. This is what you call most favored nation status, which we are now working on. It's very important. but a new strategic approach on how federal funds are allocated and delivered to states with regard to health care has been needed for years. For far too long, when it came to federal health care funding, Alaska was consistently left behind. Despite being the most rural state in America and among the highest places in our country to deliver health care, we received fewer federal health care dollars per capita than any other state, particularly when it comes to federal Medicaid, or what's called the Medicaid match. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, the FMAP as they call it. Our state, when I first got to the Senate, had the lowest federal match of any state in the country for Medicaid, 50-50. We're now at about 51-49, still one of the lowest. To make matters worse, Alaska is the only state in the country that does not use these kind of schemes they call provider taxes or state-directed payments, which are mechanisms by states that they use to inflate their federal Medicaid reimbursements, sometimes by hundreds of millions of dollars each year. This is not a failure of Alaska. This was a failure of the entire system. Bringing federal health care funding to Alaska that actually reflects our challenges has been one of my top priorities since I joined the U.S. Senate. When we were debating the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, my team and I pushed very hard to include a provision that would correct this broken FMAP formula for Alaska. And it would increase Alaska's federal match amount up to 65%, or about $200 million annually from Medicaid to our state. That has been something I've been working on for years because I thought it was fair. I went to the White House. I went all the way to the president to pitch this. I went to all my Senate colleagues, Republican colleagues, to fix this Alaska unfair situation. And I got them all on board. I got this provision in the bill. But on the 1 yard line, as we were debating this bill, late at night in the final stages of the process on this bill, Senate Democrats, led by their leader, Chuck Schumer, challenged in front of the parliamentarian that you can do under budget reconciliation this Alaska FMAP provision to try to get it stripped out of the bill. We went in, we fought them. This is kind of like a court of law. You argue your case in front of the parliamentarian, and unfortunately, they prevailed. So after nearly a decade of work on this pro-Alaska bill, in the middle of the night, it was stripped out. And it was a gut punch. It was a gut punch. I had been working on this for a long time, and it was fair, and it was the right thing to do. But we pivoted. We weren't going to take that defeat laying down. Although our Alaska FMAP enhancement was stripped out, another program remained in the bill. That was the Rural Health Transformation Program in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. Originally, it totaled $25 billion for the whole country. My team and I, we got good cooperation from the White House and Senate Republicans because they just saw how Alaska got screwed by our FMAP being taken out of the bill. We said, let's double it from 25 to 50 billion. If we could not fix Alaska's FMAP immediately, we could reshape this bill to better benefit Alaska, which is what we did. We doubled the size of that fund. We made it start in 2026 as opposed to 2028. We secured a $100 million base amount for every state in the country, not per capita, just a base amount, which of course you know is great for our state. And most importantly, we rewrote the formula of that bill to ensure our whole state was considered rural as it relates to this bill. Now, I'm sure you've all seen, our state will receive from this fund approximately $1.4 billion over the next 5 years to transform our healthcare system. Take a look at the handout here, but it has a lot of the provisions of it. Only Texas which has a population 40 times bigger than ours, received a larger award. This is the biggest federal investment in Alaska healthcare history. Now it's up to us to take advantage of this historic opportunity on healthcare. And by the way, I appreciated the good discussion I had with a number of you on this yesterday, how to seize this opportunity. To be clear, more federal dollars alone do not automatically produce better healthcare outcomes, but targeted, thoughtful investments paired with accountability can be transformative. Someone asked me last year whether I could commit to protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid when I gave these remarks last year. Let me be clear. The Working Families Tax Cuts Act doesn't touch Social Security, regardless of what you've seen in terms of ads on TV. In fact, the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, as already mentioned, delivers a $6,000 tax break for each senior. And you combine that with our passage of the Social Security Fairness Act last year, our seniors and retirees across Alaska, including our heroic teachers and firefighters, are going to have thousands of dollars more in their pockets. The bill does not touch Medicare. In fact, it strengthens Medicare by including what's called a doc fix, which ensures Medicare patients will continue to be able to get the help they need from their doctor. And finally, the bill does not touch Medicaid for Alaska. It is protected. The bill does not cut $1 of Medicaid funding to our state. If we're going to talk honestly about Medicaid cuts, the only party that actually succeeded in cutting Medicaid funding, as we wrote and debated the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, were Senate Democrats and Schumer, as they stripped out the FMAP provision of our bill, cutting about $200 million a year of Medicaid funding to Alaska. That is a fact. That is a fact. Last year, I spoke about how the political parties in D.C. have two very different visions for Alaska. With D.C.-based Democrats always looking to shut down and restrict our economy, killing jobs, and Republicans in D.C. wanting to unleash Alaska's full potential in private sector growth. These differences in outlook don't just exist in the executive branch. They exist in the legislature as well in D.C. Because here's a fact on this bill. It wasn't just the Alaska FMAP provision that Senate Democrats went to the parliamentarian to target against Alaska. They targeted and tried to work against every single provision I've told you about today. Every Alaska priority, every Alaska win, of which there were many. They went to the parliamentarian to try to strip out of this historic bill. Now, I'm not being partisan here. These are just the facts, and Alaskans should know who wants to help us and who wants to hurt us. This wasn't abstract. They went line by line, provision by provision, trying to strip Alaska priorities out of the bill before the Senate parliamentarian. They made this a priority. Of course, they always tried to kill all the provisions that I talked about on NPRA and ANWR and Cook Inlet, all the resource development provisions, but they tried to kill so much more. The $300 million we secured for an icebreaker here in Juneau, the $115 million we tried to secure to reopen ADAC, the entire Rural Health Transformation Fund, the Alaska-specific flexibility Senator Murkowski and I got in the bill on SNAP and Medicaid. Hell, they even tried to strip out the whaling tax credit that supports our North Slope subsistence whaling communities and whaling captains. Again and again, they came after Alaska. Again and again, we got in the arena, we fought, and we beat them on almost every one of these things. Alaska is winning. Our comeback is real. It is happening because of so many of these things. We need to continue to work together on all of these issues. We've seen this moment before. The TAPS generation led a comeback for America, led by Alaska. Think about it. When our country desperately needed energy in the early 1970s, Alaskans stepped up and built something extraordinary. That effort was bigger than one individual. It was about the future of our state and the strength of America. Alaskans who built TAPS still have an immense pride in what they accomplished. We all know the people who are part of that, and it's great to talk to them even today about it. And today, we're also part of a moment that I think can be just as meaningful. This is particularly important for young Alaskans. Like the TAPS generation, our kids, our grandkids have the opportunity to be part of building something very consequential and bigger than themselves. The gas line, fully rebuilding our military capability, transforming our healthcare system, working in shipyards, opening new manufacturing centers across our state. Working together, we can give the next generation of Alaskans this incredible opportunity and this incredible gift. Why does it all matter? It's jobs, it's the future, but at the end of the day, it's about our kids and grandkids. Because when the state was created, our predecessors promised Alaskans, quote, a homeland filled with opportunities. That future is now. I want to thank you all again for the great work you guys do. It's an honor of a lifetime to represent all of you in the United States Senate, and we will continue to work with all of you on these great generational opportunities we have before us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.
Okay.
Senators agreed to questions. Let's begin with
Senator, my favorite part of the speech.
Senator Bjorkman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senator Sullivan, thank you for the great speech, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of Alaskans every day in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure how many questions will be allowed, but hopefully we get to talk about a lot of things. Maybe folks will ask about lockup of federal lands for people not being able to go on federal lands to hunt wherever they want. Or maybe people will ask about other opportunities. But as we think about issues facing Alaskans at their dinner table, this fall, my office and many others were contacted about the rising cost of their health insurance, which you spoke to very well.
Yeah.
And thousands of Alaskans now are going without health insurance because of the loss of the enhanced premium and tax credits. The H.R. 1, the bill that you spoke about, will have long-lasting effects on our state. It includes promising opportunities you spoke of the Rural Healthcare Transformation Program, which could improve the efficiency and resilience of care across Alaska. At the same time, it introduces challenges, including new cost-shifting requirements for SNAP administration that will fall heavily on the state and increase our state budget. Alaskans understand the value of hard work and the dignity that comes from contributing to our communities. There is dignity in work. I appreciate your attention to ensuring the community engagement provisions within Medicaid and work requirements for SNAP are implemented with appropriate safeguards, but I'm glad they're there. However, many Alaskans are now uninsured following the loss of these enhanced premium tax credits. Provider reimbursement rates under Medicaid and Medicare remain so low that the viability of many of these medical practices are at risk, and access to primary care continues to decline across the state, especially for senior citizens. Maybe you could chat a little bit more about, now that we have the bill that we do, how are Alaskans going to get access to this primary care? Yeah. Especially if the Rural Healthcare Transformation Program is not necessarily going to be for ongoing costs. Given these pressures, what steps can you and the federal government take to help Alaska move beyond the rigid structure of the Affordable Care Act and toward an insurance and care model that is more affordable and better suited to Alaska's unique needs? How will you work to ensure that Alaska is not burdened with rising Medicare costs for our seniors at a time when primary care is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain? Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. And look, I think it's one of these issues that we all have to work together on. You saw just in my remarks how much I've focused the remarks on healthcare. It's a perpetual challenge of ours, and we all need to continue to work on it. The premium tax credit issue, you know, we're not done with that. As I mentioned, I'm part of a bipartisan group that looks to reform those, extend those, and I'm still committed to doing that with a group of Republicans and Democrat senators. We've been working on that for quite some time. As I also mentioned, you know, the challenges of the Obamacare. I mean, even my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying, hey, that did not bring affordable care. That was a big challenge. So that issue has really impacted Americans all over the country, but there's no state that has been more negatively impacted on the increase in premiums than us. Look, I'm going to continue to focus on these issues. As I mentioned in my remarks, one area where I think we're making very significant progress, which does impact Alaskans across the board, is on drug prices. We're starting to see a very dramatic decrease in drug prices. This PBM reform that we just got done, by the way, very bipartisan, that's taken out the middleman. That is something that we've been trying to get done for over 10 years. That is going to have a significant impact in what the president and his team, and we've been working with them on this issue of most favored nation status for drug pricing. So we don't get charged higher prices than what the Germans or the French or the Canadians get, and their drug pricing is much lower than ours. That is something we've been trying to achieve for a long time. So that's a really positive area. But look, we want to work with you. And again, I mentioned in our remarks yesterday when I met with the majority Senate caucus here, most of that discussion was on health care and the work and the Rural Health Transformation Fund. We want to work with you to continue to engage with CMS, the governor's team, and all of you on how to seize that opportunity with regard to lowering health care costs, having Alaskans get health care much closer to home, which is a big part of that goal. As I mentioned, that's not going to solve everything, but I do think it's a historic opportunity, $1.4 billion to transform a health care system that we design. And that's never been the case. The feds have always told us how to design things on health care, and they don't understand it nearly as well as all of you do. The other thing we've been working on, and I'm glad you asked it, because my team and I think it's really, really important. I tried to get it in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, but it goes to the Medicare reimbursement issue that you're talking about. I have legislation called the Rural Rate Act that is very focused on Medicare reimbursement issues, and the SOLS Act and the Critical Act. This is something my team and I have been working on really, really hard, because to your point, you're seeing that certain doctors, they don't take Medicare, and then you have a huge gap in coverage for our seniors, and they don't take it because the reimbursement rate for our state doesn't reflect the health care challenges. So all those bills that I just mentioned are serious efforts to bring the Medicare reimbursement rate for Alaska in a way that aligns with our challenges. I did mention the doc fix was in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. That's important, but I think there's more strategic areas that we can continue to focus on that, and my team and I are very focused on these issues. So if we get ideas from you, we want to continue to work on them, but the high costs of health insurance continues to be a very significant challenge for our state, again, which is why I focused on it a lot in my remarks and why we focus on it so much back in D.C. One final thing on the SNAP and Medicaid work requirements. You referenced those. If you saw in the legislation, these are 20-hour-a-week requirements, either for work or training or volunteering or education. It's pretty broad. It's very flexible. And Senator Murkowski and I, we got a lot of flexibilities for Alaska on this, in terms of rural communities, in terms of areas with high unemployment rates, in terms of Alaska Natives. Many, many elements of this bill recognize our unique challenges in terms of the implementation date even for 2028. So this bill has a lot in there specifically for Alaska, some of which, as I mentioned, my Democrat colleagues tried to strip out. We fought them and beat them. But you still have to remember the Clinton-era welfare reform. If you remember that, that was 30 hours a week of a work requirement. A lot of people were critical of that. I think now folks saw that as working. And we want to lift people up, right? I mean, the one thing that I've said, sometimes people say, hey, our goal is to have more people on Medicaid. I actually think the goal should be to lift people up, to give them the skills, to move them off Medicaid, to get a job, working for a union where they get good health care and go up on the slope. So I think that's common sense in terms of the requirements, but there are a lot of Alaska flexibilities in there. And then finally, we work with CMS. You may have seen there was a significant award. We can get you the details. I think it was up to $13 million or $30 million to have CMS work with the Department of Public Assistance here to make sure the systems are updated to be ready on those kind of work requirements, which, again, we got extended for Alaska out to 2028 on the implementation of those. But we're watching that issue very closely. We legislated like crazy on it in this bill to take care of Alaska's unique circumstances, Senator Murkowski and myself, and I think it's a good balance.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Can we move on to Representative Mina?
Thank you, President Stevens. Good morning, Senator Sullivan, and thank you for recognizing the dire situation that we have in Alaska's healthcare system. And so I'll continue on the healthcare thread, but I'll talk more specifically about the Rural Health Transformation Program. You said that the Rural Health Transformation Program will be a $1.4 billion shot in Alaska's healthcare system, that it's flexible and tailored for Alaska, and it can address our issues with travel, our clinics that are struggling in rural areas, and families that are paying high costs. We've had a lot of different hearings and conversations with providers and stakeholders about the RHTP, and here are some of the areas and issues that I've learned about with these funds. We can't use the money to help Alaskans who are self-employed, who are dealing with rising health insurance premiums, who are risking losing their business or having to choose to get healthcare coverage. We can't use the funds to help clinics pay for basics like broadband or expanding their facilities. We can't use the funds to help providers pay their frontline workers and make sure we retain those workers. We can't use the funds to help build housing to help retain the workers that we have and attract them here, or use them for areas like loan repayment programs. We can't use the funds to also help with the immense amount of work and bureaucracy that is going to be placed onto the Division of Public Assistance. And this morning, the Department of Health actually did release their analysis on the Medicaid coverage loss related to those community engagement requirements. And looking at the Medicaid expansion population, which is about 61,000 Alaskans at least, about 15 to 20% of Alaskans who are on Medicaid expansion, so about 9 to 12,000 Alaskans, would risk losing their Medicaid coverage because of these new requirements. You fought for H.R. 1. You helped shape the Rural Health Transformation Program funds. Why are these funds so difficult for us to use to address Alaska's core issues? And how will this finite fund help address Alaskans, the thousands of Alaskans who will lose their health insurance?
Well, look, we had a good discussion with this the Majority Senate conference here yesterday, and as the legislation's getting implemented, I think these are all important questions to work on. Some of those are through the regulatory approach that CMS is taking on this. Again, if you look at this handout and what the state of Alaska put together on its 6 areas of focus: healthy beginnings, healthcare access, strengthening the workforce, healthcare communities, sparking innovation. I think these are all important areas. This is not going to be a panacea that solves everything, but as we are working through it, and it is historic in terms of the investment, and we're designing it. Alaska's designing it. There are some, as you're mentioning, I'm not aware of all those restrictions, but as those come up, the one thing I said, I was talking to Senator Giesel about this, you know, we can continue to work with CMS because a lot of those weren't put in the law. And if we're seeing as the implementation over, you know, the next 3 to 4 to 5 years says, hey, we got to come back to CMS and say, well, wait a minute, well, we don't understand that restriction, or wait a minute, why can't we be more flexible here? That's why I want to continue to stay engaged with all of you. As I mentioned on the issue of the implementation in the Department of Public Assistance, there's going to be, as I mentioned, a significant investment from the federal government to help with the systems here to track that. And, you know, I haven't seen the numbers on the Medicaid numbers, but I'm not sure in terms of the work requirement. But on the expansion population, and remember, the work requirement is a 20-hour work requirement. And let's talk about the expansion population. This is actually designed, the work requirement or the volunteer requirement or the training requirement or the school requirement. You can meet this requirement by doing all of those things: work, school, training, volunteering. Okay, if you're and of course the exemptions on that are very significant. If you have dependents, you're not required. If you're a senior, you're not required. If you have any disabilities, you're not required. But let's give the example of someone on the expansion population. If you're a 28-year-old young man on the expansion population, you have an income that's below 130% of the poverty line, and you're getting Medicaid, which you're entitled to, and you're not going to do 20 hours a week on one of these things, to me, that's not a Medicaid cut. That is a choice from that individual. And I think it's important, as I mentioned, for those individuals to encourage them to advance and help their community through school, through volunteering, through training. And so I think it's a common sense reform. I haven't seen the numbers, but again, we put in, our state got more flexibilities on the implementation of those requirements than any other state in the country. As I mentioned, some of my Senate Democrat colleagues try to strip those out. Not sure why they were coming after us so hard, but I think that those are common sense requirements that Alaskans can agree on, and the help that DPA is going to get from CMS, I think, is going to help address some of the issues.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. We'll move on to Senator Rauscher.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. So, Senator Sullivan, I thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Troy.
I also want to personally thank you for the work that you do with development and industry here in Alaska. But I heard you mention a little bit earlier that there are those that oppose what we're trying to accomplish here in Alaska and what you're trying to do for us in Alaska. And I think you mentioned Schumer's name there. And so who are the big challenges that you face? We want to know how to help you. And so what are the big challenges that you face while you're in Washington trying to sell what we're trying to get accomplished here in Alaska?
Well, look, I have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. Thank you for the question, George. A lot of what we're working on, I'm going to be going back to D.C. working on is dealing with infrastructure. We're working on the WRDA bill, the Waters Resources Development Act. That's ports and harbors. That's very bipartisan. The highway bill, I'm on the Environment and Public Works Committee. We write the highway bill. That's very bipartisan. Permitting reform, we're looking at a big bill on permitting reform, which we need desperately for our country so it doesn't take 20 years to permit the Kensington mine, nearby Juneau, which is a disaster. In housing, we're going to be taking up a big housing bill, which is such a big issue for Alaska. All of that's going to be bipartisan. My Save Our Seas Act, the oceans work that I do, cleaning up our oceans, having sustainable fisheries. I get strong support from my Democratic friends. But I've been asked a lot, like, why are those guys, why were they so focused on coming after us in this Working Families Tax Cuts Act? Because, look, it's one thing to vote against a bill. Okay? It is quite another thing to go line by line in a bill and say anything that's good for Alaska, we are going to target and go to the parliamentarian and try to strip out of the bill. Okay? They did that. That's kind of unprecedented, and we fought it. But it was, to be honest, kind of annoying. They didn't do it to any other state in the country. So I get asked, well, why are they doing that? My answer, and I know these guys pretty well, on that bill, back in D.C. with the Senate caucus, the far left is in charge, right? You look at who's driving the policy. In the far left in D.C. with the Democrats has a core principle, and one of them is to shut down Alaska. That is what they do. That's why we had the 70 executive orders. That is a core principle. So they took it to the legislative branch, and I will tell you this, it extends to other things. When the Democrats were in the majority in the Senate, Schumer was majority leader, they had the House, and they had the White House under Biden. One of the things they did, and our press never reported on it, they actively went after Alaska Native corporations. Actively. I don't know, it was crazy. In the American Recovery Act, when they did this giant $20 billion fund for Native people in America, they specifically included a provision saying, but those funds don't go to anyone who's an ANC. It was shocking. I went to the Senate floor saying, what the hell is going on? Is this racism? I mean, who the heck, why are they coming after ANCs? This is a Schumer priority. They went after that in the CHIPS and Science Act, $240 billion. Intel, everybody got money. They put a provision in there saying, but if you're an ANC, you don't get any federal dollars. I mean, now why were they doing that? I think it's because our Alaska Native corporations want to develop their lands and want to develop Alaska's resources and know those are good jobs. And they came out, these bills passed, targeting Alaska Native corporations. So it's all related to keeping us shut down. But I think that was shocking, how much Schumer went after ANCs and our Native people. And I'll tell you this, I fight this kind of stuff like hell. I went to so many senators on the Democratic side saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you targeting the first people of my state? And I think it's because the far left groups don't want them to develop Alaska's resources, and they listen to those groups, and then they pass legislation excluding opportunities for us. So it happens a lot. And it's not just going after the parliamentarian, it's law. Go look at the American Recovery Act. $20 billion for all the Native people in the country, but it had a provision saying, but if you're part of an Alaska Native corporation, you are excluded from getting these funds. Outrageous. Outrageous.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. I'm sorry, we have to move ahead. We have a lot of people who want to ask questions. We're not going to get to them all, but we'll go now to Representative Colon.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is my question is kind of what you were talking about before, and thank you for all the work you're doing to defend Alaska and make these changes. But it's interesting to me. Sometimes I don't know how we can help what's going on in D.C. Sometimes it feels very far away, and so I guess I'm asking, what as a legislature, what can we do to help support the efforts you're doing in not only in the resource development, but with fishing and everything? So,
Julia, it's a great question, and you guys can help a lot. And in my experience, you've done, just in the last few years, I think some really, really important things. Because when we're back in D.C. and I'm able to show people in D.C., my colleagues, that my state is unified on an issue. And by the way, the best way to kind of demonstrate that, I think, is when you guys pass resolutions, when they're unanimous in particular. And so I think that's really, really helpful. And let me give you a couple examples. You might remember a couple years ago we were working really hard on the Willow project. And I see the mayor, as I'm Josiah here, and I had asked all of you, hey, if you guys, in my speech, can you guys put out a resolution relating how important Willow is? And we did that because if you remember, I met with President Biden. I handed him that resolution. And I said, look, Mr. President, I know you got this. I also handed him that 70 executive order chart, too. At the time, it was at 48. But I handed him, I said, well, what are you doing? Why are you attacking us so much? But here's what my constituents think about Willow. And I gave him that. And it was from all of you guys. But I'll tell you where that was even more important. You might remember I talked about it in my speech. We knew there was going to be litigation from these far-left groups that don't want us to develop our land. And we knew that Judge Gleason was going to have to determine if it's legally, if this project was, quote, in the public interest. Okay? In the public interest. That was a really important part of her decision. Well, what better way to demonstrate that something's in the public interest than to have a unanimous resolution from the state of Alaska legislature? And if you remember in the litigation, she cited the resolution from you guys as making it clear that the Willow project was in the public interest. So that was a great example of what you were doing, reinforcing our work, and then winning the litigation that would have killed that project, which is one of the most important developments in our country. So I think that that's a really good idea. If we can work on that, I think to the extent we have it, unity on the Alaska LNG project and how important that is from all of you guys, again, unanimously, is really important. Elise and I were talking about an issue just yesterday. We're working really hard trying to get a waiver on this $100,000 visa requirement that the administration put in, which was kind of targeting, hey, if you're a big tech guy and you're very wealthy and you want to come to America, you should kind of pay up to come here. Well, that is impacting our state because a lot of our teachers come from overseas, right? So we're trying to get, Senator Murkowski and I and Congressman Begich, we're trying to get the Homeland Security Secretary to give us a waiver on, hey, if it's a teacher from the Philippines who's teaching in rural Alaska, we don't want to, they can't afford $100,000 and they're doing a very important service. So we were talking about a resolution, just yesterday. If you guys could do something like that showed the numbers and everything on how many teachers and how unique it is for us, and I can go to the Secretary of Homeland Security with that, I think there's a whole host of areas in which you guys come and enforce. I know it's not easy to get unanimous resolutions, but you've done it. The Anwar one was important, as I mentioned. The Speaker and Lieutenant Governor Malat, after one of my addresses, gave me that. I was able to go to D.C. to my colleagues. Because remember, we got that done in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. I'm sorry, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. That was a tough vote for some of my Republican colleagues to open Anwar. And they all did it. But the resolution that I was able to bring to the senators saying, hey, my whole state wants this done. All the Democrats, all the Republicans. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to do that. When you guys are speaking with one voice in resolutions, and I would really like to do this one on the visa issue because you guys can speak with a lot of authority. You can probably put in that resolution the numbers of teachers that need it, how impactful it is on education. So I think there's a lot of areas we can continue to work on. It's a great question.
Thank you, Senator. We'll move on to Representative Galvin.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. I appreciate your coming here year after year and showing your willingness to partner. And it will be no surprise to you that I want to talk about kids.
Good.
I would like to tell you just some basic numbers so that you have that piece, that we are looking at more than 5,000 of our children this year alone starting their school year with no teacher. Mostly it's a rural
Wait,
problem.
sorry, Lee, with what? No teacher?
No teacher.
Okay.
More than 5,000. We have more than 500 on H-1 visa. So I'm going to set that aside because you've already told me that you can't wait to work on that. And instead, I'm going to talk about three children who I read about yesterday who live in Soldotna. They are experiencing an out-of-mind experience because of what's happening with ice right now. Unfortunately, Alaska, we've all felt quite protected. We've not experienced any of what we read in the national news, but sadly, there are three children. One is the age of 5 years old, the other one is 16, and the other one is 18. The mom came to Alaska three years ago in 2023, married to an American citizen, came here from Mexico. I can promise you she's not a rapist, she's not a murderer. Apparently there's not any evidence of even a criminal record.
Thank you, Representative.
If I may,
Get to the question, please.
yes, the question is, how can you help us work together to help our families here know that we're going to have a safe place? Apparently they didn't even have there's no prison here or detention center for the children. And so I'm hoping you can help us work on this issue together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of that one, Elise, but give us the information. I think we get information from you guys on a whole host of issues, and we'd be glad to look at it. We've had a good track record of getting things done by the federal government, whether it's funding or, other issues on immigration even, but working with them to fix things if we think they're problematic. So get us the info, and I'll be glad to work with you and help you.
Thank you,
and help
Senator.
that situation.
Thank you so much. Representative Sapp.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker. Senator Sullivan, always great for you to come be here and address us. I will be super brief and pointed with my comments. First, thank you so much for addressing really the long storied history of active duty military in the state since your tenure as senator.
You're part of that.
I'm the only one, obviously, in this body who served in the airborne brigades, Alaska's finest, the U.S.'s finest airborne brigades.
Yeah.
So when the nationwide Democrats attempted to shut it down, and to see 12 years ago, and to see how far we've progressed with the 11th Airborne Division today is, I think, super impactful and beneficial to the state. So question is really simple, Senator. Right now, 11th Airborne Division is looking to add division-level fires, aviation assets, lots more military presence coming to Alaska. But in the event that, let's say there was a change in the makeup of the Senate, what should I tell my constituents in Fairbanks after hundreds of millions of dollars invested in Fort Wainwright? I guess, would we expect that to continue, or we would return to the other times? Thank you.
Well, look, thank you for your service. That's a really that's a story I think that we're all proud of. And again, I really want to give the credit to our communities, especially up in Fairbanks. Like I said, you might remember they came in and said, we're going to get rid of the 425. That would have devastated Anchorage, by the way, 5,000 airmen and their families. And so I put a hold. I was a brand new senator. I put a hold on General Milley. He was up to be Chief of Staff of the Army. I said, no, you're not going anywhere. Then I put a hold on the Secretary of the Army's confirmation. And I told these guys, you need to explain to me why we would get rid of the only airborne brigade combat team in the entire Indo-Pacific. The reserve force for a contingency on the Korean Peninsula made no sense, 0 sense. So I held them for a long time, and we got them to say uncle, because Obama ended up cutting 35,000 troops, and they kept the 425. What's really great, though, is that we've expanded that now into the 11th Airborne Division. Most Americans think we got the 82nd Airborne down in Georgia, and that's it. We got the 11th Airborne Division, right? I always like to you know, you're an Army guy. I always like to kind of create some competition saying, hey, the 11th Airborne is even better than the 82nd Airborne, and all the 82nd Airborne guys get really mad. But it's great. And if you read the history of the 11th Airborne, it's very storied. It was this great airborne division in World War II. So we restood that up, and we're expanding. It's great. It's so exciting, so important. Tonight in Fairbanks, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George, is coming to Fairbanks with this entire big group to do this giant military exercise in our state. The top Army officer in America will be in Fairbanks tonight with the community. And the community was what made this happen. So I went to the Army, and this colonel was in charge, and he said, well, Senator, we're cutting the 40,000, and I've been tasked with going around the country to see which one of these units should not be cut. And I said, well, Colonel, I said, that's great. I said, but can I tell you something? I said, you will not see any state as motivated as our state, right, on this. There's going to be parades and rallies when you show up to show how much we love our military and how much we should not cut these troops. So he kind of like patted me on the head, sure. And I saw him like 3 months later after he did his nationwide tour, and he came to me and he's like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, Alaska, you guys were crazy, right? Like there was rallies, there was to keep the 425. Like the community came out in Anchorage and in Fairbanks, and it really helped. There's no doubt about it. So look, this is happening. You may have seen the president put forward a top-line budget for the Pentagon, which is a very big number to increase it, because you know the one thing in your packet that we had in terms of handouts, this adversaries in the Arctic. If you look at what the Chinese and Russians are doing in our AOR here in the Arctic, it's very aggressive. Joint ops, joint strategic bomber task forces, joint Navy task forces in our waters, in our air. So we have to build up. But to your question, again, this is a very, very different approach between Republicans in D.C. and Democrats in D.C. Joe Biden cut the Department of Defense every year, his budget. Every year he put forward cuts. Schumer certainly is for cuts to the military. So it's just a very different approach. So to answer your question directly, I think if you had a takeover, you would see significant decreases in our military budget and our military readiness. President Biden was not focused on military readiness. He was focused on things that had very little to do with lethality and winning wars and using our military for what it's meant for. And you know it better than anybody, which is to go win wars when we're called upon. It's not about climate change. It's not about all this other social stuff that Biden focused on. It's about winning wars and lethality, and that's what we need to do. And the two parties have a very different outlook on that.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. We've reached the moment where we have time for one more question. I know there are 17 people out there that have questions. I'd encourage you to talk to the senator on your own, and we'll go to, at this point, to Senator Dunbar for the last question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Sullivan, for bringing up Willow. I know you worked on the resolution we passed here. For many of us in this body, it was then Representative Mary Peltola who convinced us that it had to be unanimous so that President Biden would open Willow, and then he did. But you've been very critical of President Biden in this year's speech, as in years past.
Yeah. You
sent a letter to the legislature, your office, directly criticizing congressional Democrats. You repeated those condemnations today. In contrast, you've stressed the close relationship you have with the Trump administration, working with them on things like oil and AI. You've said yes to Trump many times. I'm wondering if you're willing to say no. For example, if we saw a deployment of federal forces to Alaska, like we've seen in Minnesota, or if the federal government demands that we purge our voter rolls, will you say no to Trump? Thank you.
So I think you were the guy who asked me last year about Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and I gave you the answer just now. And again, just to repeat, on Medicaid, when you asked me, I said, we're not going to cut Medicaid. You know who cut Medicaid for Alaska? Chuck Schumer. right? That's a fact. So I wish that you and others could have gone to Schumer and said, hey, why are you cutting Medicaid for Alaska? I asked my senator about Medicaid. He defended it. Why did you cut it? So look, in terms of the president and his team, my North Star, in terms of my dealing with those guys, is what's good for Alaska and what's good for our country. And I've been effective working with them. When they do things that I don't like, there's times that I will beat them up in public. Go look at some of the Armed Services hearings, some of the Commerce Committee hearings, where we take them to task. When they're doing other things, I will engage with them, whether it's on Greenland or ICE in Minneapolis. And to me, the key issue is how are you effective for your state and for your country? And that's my North Star. And sometimes people, all right, you want to put out a tweet smashing them on certain issues or criticizing them. Sometimes that works, but sometimes if you want results, that's not always the best way to get results. And as I mentioned, Elise and others, I'm proud of the results I've gotten with this administration on issues where I disagree with them. Some of the funding freezes, some of the layoffs on federal employees that were very important to Alaska. We've made huge impacts on all of those issues. So I push back publicly and in private on all kinds of things, with always the North Star for me, how to be effective for all of you, for the people I represent, and for my country. And I will say that when it comes to resource development in Alaska, you're damn right I criticized Joe Biden because he deserved it. Damn right I highlighted Schumer in this speech because he deserved it. And people in Alaska need to know who's trying to help them and who's trying to hurt our state. And in my view, it's very, very clear, as I mentioned.
And there you have it. That was Senator Dan Sullivan addressing the Joint Legislative session down in Juneau, and he spoke for about an hour and a half. And he hit on a number of topics. He said the theme of his speech was an Alaska comeback, coming and primarily focused on coming back from the 70 executive orders that he says the Biden administration locked up Alaska. He talked a lot about the Working Families Tax Cut Act, and so they are continuing with their work down there that talked about mandatory lease sales for Alaska, child care. He did actually talked about Elise Galvin and how she had brought this to his attention along with others. He also talked about after the Cold War, the Pentagon basically forgot Alaska and how they're now seeing a change, that it was a military comeback, and that we could see that in Alaska we now have 105th generation fighters. That's between Eielson and Elmendorf. He even spoke about the Marine Corps expanding in Alaska, but then he focused a lot of his time on the Coast Guard, and that they were doing the largest investment in the Coast Guard. That includes 16 new icebreakers, $30 million for Juneau to home port the icebreaker Storis. And then the Commandant told Senator Sullivan, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, that there could be up to 4 more icebreakers home ported in Alaska. He also spent some time talking about health care and then answering some questions. Of course, our reporter Will Courtney is down there and is hoping to speak with Senator Sullivan. Additionally, Senator Sullivan is heading to Fairbanks for an event as well. And our reporters out of Fairbanks are also expecting to catch up with the senator when he is in Fairbanks for this evening. So we're going to bring all of that to you tonight, not only on our news, on our broadcast news, but also on our website and on our free streaming apps. We know a lot of people are watching this on social media, but if you also, on your TV, if you go to Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Android TV, you can download the free Alaska's News Source app. This gives you a chance to not only watch our live streams, but if you miss a newscast, you can check it out there. So always a nice thing to have on your television. Go ahead and download that as well. And then, as I said, if you miss a newscast, you can catch up. You miss a news story, you just want to check out a specific news story, that's there. And of course, all the latest weather also posted on those free streaming platforms on our Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Roku. So check it out there. Thank you so much for joining us here.